Well, chapter 1 introduced us to who and where and when. Chapter 2 talked about the heights, both in the career that Jean-Baptiste Clemens had and in the personal life, the heights. But it's no spoiler that chapter 3 is about the fall. So get your priest tab collar on, because someone is going to confessional and you are the priest. In a post-God Europe, when judges can't be trusted to be morally superior to you and there's no God, who are you going to confess to? So we get some hints, some cracks in the armor, and the beginning of a confession, the beginning of the fall here in chapter 3. Well, that incident on the bridge was a crack in Jean-Baptiste, in his psyche. He heard the laugh and it began to jar in his subconscious something. It was disturbing. Couldn't quite get at the meaning right at the moment, but something about that laugh on that bridge, seemingly coming from the water and below his apartment window, something jarred him. Coinciding with that subconscious bothering of the laugh was a kind of depression and physical malady. So all these things sort of in a perfect storm, maybe subconscious, maybe depression, and maybe just middle age setting in a little bit. Now the physical depression makes him not quite the vigorous, happy, joyful man he once was. And so this creeping sense of the fall is already moving in. And he says, what I really need to do is live on an island. Why? Because islands are easy to dominate. So all of a sudden, we've gone from altruism in chapter 2 to now something of a power play, to saying what's important to me, what I value, is to live on a small island, to be a big fish in a little pond, because islands are easier to dominate. I can be over people if there's easier opponents there on an island. Then he says, can we take a walk? And he looks and he sees the old shops, and in the old shops there are still the remnants of a bygone era where not only did someone have slaves, but they advertised as such. And so Jean-Baptiste makes the distinction that he's already been making, especially in the first chapter about the Dutch people and the Europeans, in that they are double. And he says when he looked in the mirror in the second chapter, he realized that he too was double. And so there is the immoral action. That's kind of one level. And then there is the lack of shame for the immoral action, which is another level. But then if you hide the immoral action, then that's also a level. And so he's saying that what a time it was when people used to shamelessly just do evil atrocities like slavery, whereas now we're more sophisticated and we do the exact same thing, but we baptize it. We slap a happy label on it. And he says that's really what's important. You want to be a slave master, but you want your slaves to smile at you and pretend to be happy and give you these courteous grins, so that the same awful reality of slavery is taking place, but since it's all about you and your power and you're living on an island and you're being above everybody, that you really just want to put the best face on it. And so that if you stop and pause and think there for a second, what was he avoiding in the first couple chapters? The first 2 chapters, he was avoiding being a judge. Well, the only thing worse than a judge is, of course, a slave master, because a judge at least purportedly is just operating by some law that he or she is bound to. But a slave master is just merely dominating and asserting their power over a person. So he's saying in chapter 2, I saw myself as a righteous person, as someone who took on widows and orphans in my career and helped blind people when I wasn't in my career, and gave up my seat on the bus and gave up my seat on the theater and helped girls with their bags, and donated money and didn't accept money and turned down awards, and all these acts that were altruism in the last chapter Now that he's a little sick, a little depressed, and now that there's something bothering him about that laugh on the bridge or down in the water while he was on the bridge, all of that is now turning into the fact that he's not really about altruism or good or righteousness, but rather just about sheer power. But he's got a conscience enough to know that he should cover up that quest for power. Power is essential. And then he says, well, what if everyone just was what they were? Well, that would be hell. So to be on earth is to hide who we really are and baptize all of these horrible things we do with good motives and to really cover up. And he said, could you imagine if everyone was just reduced to a business card? That would be hell. If you just essentially said what your job is, it would be so depressing and awful because everything we do has some manipulative, awful function that would be hell on earth if we all just boiled ourselves down to a tiny business card. And he says, you know what would be on my business card? That I'm a play actor and you can't count on it. And so he is a phony, but there's something, of course, paradoxical about someone saying that they're a liar. Well, are they telling the truth about that they're a liar? And when you're a play actor, are you honest about your role? And so there's a two-facedness going on in oxymoronic aspect to who he says he is. He is honest about the fact that he's lying, or is he lying about the fact that he's not honest? And he says, that crack in his armor about the laugh in the... and it's okay if you don't understand that right now, because we're going to get to it here right at the end of this chapter 3. But the crack in the armor about the laugh under the bridge, what it caused him to do was not really have a realization, but it was an occasion to begin to have realizations in which he remembered. And he remembered one obscure fact about himself, that when, back in chapter 2, he was helping blind people on the streets, blind people, he would tip their hat when they said tip his hat when they said thank you to him. And that is, of course, a meaningless gesture toward the person you're being kind to. Similarly, he had a tongue slip about helping a broke-down motorist, and he says, no one would have done this, when he meant anyone would have helped you. And these things indicate to him something deep going on in his heart that he's covering up by being this play actor that you can't count on. And that is that he was performing for an audience. Obviously, he was helping the blind person when he tipped their hat. He was indicating that he was doing it for attention, for the recognition. In other words, he was doing it, it was all about him. It was for his credit and his benefit. And so the hat tip to the blind is jogging his memory that maybe my altruism isn't actually altruism. Maybe everything I'm doing is a power play. Maybe even my morality is a tool for self-righteousness. And so he said, I used to have a talent for being forgetful, and people would associate that or misdiagnose that as this Christian virtue of forgiveness, and how all the major religions have this great virtue of forgiving people. But those people who are religious struggle with the forgetting part. But when you have a coldness or a lack of love, a lack of agape, redemptive, selfless, other-centered love, well, you can actually be very forgetful, and that can masquerade as being a forgiving person. He said, I used to have that. But again, something about this incident at the bridge made me start to remember things. And boy, did I start to remember things. And so you do a flashback, and he flashes back to a time when he's in a car and there's a broke-down motorcycle in front of him. People behind him at the red light can't see that there's a broken down motorcycle in front of him. And so when the light turns green, everyone behind Jean-Baptiste Clements starts to honk their horn and yell at him. He yells at the motorcycle to at least clear the way so that the rest of the traffic can go, and then an altercation ensues. Well, someone from the crowd, someone from the sidewalk, sucker punches him, Jean-Baptiste Clements, for being in an altercation with someone with a motorcycle between their legs. And so now here he is in his beautiful blue suit, laying down on a Paris street, and everyone mocking and scorning him. He stands up and he just gets in his car, and the person calls him a loser or whatever. And so it's not really that incident, but the reflection on that incident, which is this. Jean-Baptiste Clemens looks back at that incident hundreds of times, and he begins to do some soul searching. And he says, if I was the man that I thought I was, that wouldn't bother me. First of all, who cares about what a couple strangers thinks? Second of all, even if I did care, that was a long time ago, and all those people have forgotten. So if I was really the man I thought it was, so if I was really about love and truth and justice, an incident like that wouldn't shatter my whole self-image, and yet it did. I saw myself as a Superman, and this little incident on the roadway showed me that I wasn't the Superman. So there's something about these two incidents, about being on the bridge and hearing the laugh, that's jarred him. And secondly, about this road incident in which he was humiliated or shame was brought on him and he didn't have the right way to act at the time. These two incidents are beginning his fall. So these are not necessarily moral failures, but they're two incidents that indicate a deeper truth about him. Well, he goes on to say that for him, power became essential, and he was becoming more than a judge, more than a slave driver. And then he moves to the topic of sex and says that the way that he related with women also proved something about himself. However he related with women, it was the opposite of selfless, agape, other-centered, even romantic love. It was actually more physical. And then he tells another incident. And then in that incident, he didn't even want to have a fling with this girl, but she was just a little bit interesting, a little bit unique. And so he went ahead and did that thing. Then, just like all the other women, he forgot about her. But then he heard that she was talking about his deficiencies, I'm assuming, in the bedroom. And that infuriates Jean-Baptiste Clement because he's not being portrayed as the man that he thinks he is. So what does he do? He has to seduce her, humiliate her, win her back, humiliate, win her back, humiliate, until he has the upper hand, until he has the power. He doesn't feel good about himself until he's continually, and in the most grotesque way that Camus doesn't tell what it is, thank God, in the most grotesque way has humiliated this woman. So now there's been 3 incidents of the fall so far. So at the very beginning of the chapter, the laughter on the bridge / the laughter under his apartment. Number 2, this incident on the roadway. And number 3, this sexual encounter with this woman. All 3 of these things have created a fissure, have created a problem, and a fall is beginning to take place because in their own unique way, each of these 3 incidents have indicated to Jean-Baptiste Clement that he is not the person that he thought he was. And so finally, now at the end of chapter 3, he's going to shed light at the beginning of the chapter, and we're going to flashback from a flashback. Okay, so Clements is talking to you, his friend from Paris, his new acquaintance from Paris. He's told us about the incident on the bridge wherein he heard someone laughing and he looked behind and he couldn't see anyone, and he looked to the water, the only place where the laughter seems like it was coming from. That is not the incident here at the end of chapter 3. That incident that I just talked about reminded him of an even prior incident. So we're going back and back. And this is the original incident that second laughter incident shook him to the core and caused, again, his fall. So again, Christian theology, there's a Garden of Eden. Eve and Adam don't obey God's prohibition against eating the fruit. They listen to the voice of the serpent who says, you will not surely die. And they are exiled and they spend all of their days now east of Eden is the biblical fall. Well, Jean-Baptiste Clements was righteous at work, and he was righteous when he wasn't at work in chapter 2. And now, the incident on the bridge, the incident at the traffic, and the sexual incident with the woman have all 3 coalesced to have a fall. But particularly, the incident on the bridge reminds him of a previous incident on the bridge. So here goes. That particular night in November, 2 or 3 years before the evening when I thought I heard laughter behind me, I was returning to the left bank and my home by way of the Pont Royal. It was an hour past midnight, a fine rain was falling, a drizzle rather, that scattered the few people on the streets. I had just left a mistress who was surely already asleep. I was enjoying that walk, a little numbed, my body calmed and irrigated by a flow of blood, gentle as the falling rain. On the bridge, I passed behind a figure leaning over the railing and seeming to stare at the river. On closer view, I made out a slim young woman dressed in black, the back of her neck cool and damp. Between her dark hair and coat collar stirred me, but I went on after a moment's hesitation. At the end of the bridge, I followed the quays towards Saint Michel, where I lived. I had already gone some 50 yards when I heard the sound, which despite the distance seemed dreadfully loud in the midnight silence, of a body striking the water. I stopped short, but without turning around. Almost at once I heard a cry, repeated several times, which was going downstream. Then it suddenly ceased. The silence that followed as the night suddenly stood still seemed interminable. I wanted to run and yet didn't stir. I was trembling, I believe, from cold and shock. I told myself that I had to be quick, and I felt an irresistible weakness steal over me. I have forgotten what I thought then. Too late, too far, or something of the sort. I was still listening as I stood motionless. Then slowly under the rain, I went away. I informed no one. So Jean-Baptiste Clemens can't remember why he didn't help the woman, I'm assuming, who was committing suicide. But the fact is, he did not help that woman. And so the later incident, 3 or 4 years later, of someone laughing on the bridge now explains why his righteousness is starting to crumble before him. And the incident on the roadway and the sexual incident with this woman are just further reminders that he is not perfect. And so in a post-Christian world, how do you find redemption? Who do you confess your sins to? Who is holy enough to hear them? And who do you confess your sins to? Who can do something? Who can bring expiation? Who can bring redemption? What is John Baptiste Clemens up to?